sessions where we'll kind of talk things through, and there'll be a couple of breaks, so you'll have time for that. I'm also going to make plenty of time at the end for questions. That being said, the intention here is that this is more of a conversation. So if you have something that comes in, don't hesitate to interject. I have chat up here. If I see it, I'll respond to it, or you can just pop in if you have a question, if something that we're discussing needs further clarification. As you heard, my name is John Arnott. I am a longtime Vistage member. I've been a part of a small business group, a CE group, and now I'm a part of a trusted advisor group. I haven't been a part of a group like yours, but I've been a part of 3 others. So I know quite a bit about the Vistage model, and I'm currently still an active Vistage member, and my meeting is actually next week. I am the CEO of ContentFirst.Marketing, and as you heard, we intentionally built it to be 100% virtual. The idea was that people could work where they were most comfortable. Some people that's their home, some people that's a shared space, sometimes it's a Starbucks, but they could work where they were most comfortable and in some situations when they were most productive. And we'll talk a little bit about that in detail a little bit down the road. What I did want to do though is kind of do some housekeeping items at the very beginning here. You may find it easier to experience this if you put me in speaker view and potentially pin me. That way it's taking up your full screen. As we go through this, there will be some slides and it'll be easier to see them and read them if you put them in that view. And the next thing I want to share is a little bit about our company. We have now an organization that covers the globe, but initially it started out small. The idea being that, yeah, let's start a company that's 100% virtual. It seems super easy. And when you have a handful of people, it is. But as you grow and as you add layers of management, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So we had to purposely and intentionally do certain things. When I joined Vistage, I thought, hey, this is great. I'll be around 20 CEOs. I'm sure all of them know how to build a virtual culture. They can share that with me. But what I learned really quickly is nobody in my group had done that before. And so we had to kind of learn as we went. And over the past nearly 8 years now, we've learned a lot of good things that I think that you will find useful here. I actually created this presentation initially before COVID. It was just intended to share with my fellow Vistage members how they could handle their remote workforce better. But now since we've had COVID, there's been a lot of companies that are just forced into this situation and didn't have the opportunity to be intentional. And so I've added more to it to make it more helpful for those that are in that situation. What I'm hoping that you'll get out of this today, either directly or through inference, are answers to some key questions. How do you keep the team motivated? How do you build trust when everybody's remote? How do you know if they are getting their work done or not, just clocking in and doing the bare minimum? How can you sense when somebody is achieving burnout if you don't see them and you're potentially working asynchronously? How do you get them to engage online when maybe that's not their personality type? And how do you address those feelings that the culture is just different when everybody works online? And during today's presentation, our conversation, I'm hoping that you'll get the answers to those questions. When you build a virtual organization, it's broken down to 2 things, 2 key things that you need to have in place. You need to have the right tools, that is the right technology to support a virtual organization. And you need to build the right culture. And these 2 things are the foundational components that you're going to purposefully build. And many companies have elements of them, but maybe they're not necessarily all tied together, purposely created for supporting a virtual team. And why do you have these things? Well, the tools are in place to help with one major issue of virtual teams, helping the individual overcome feelings of isolation. For some people, being by themselves, working is amazing. They love it. But for many people, and for most people over time, that isolation wears them down. I heard earlier, one of you just decides to go back into the office in June. Another one of you has to go there to check mail periodically. They're getting over these feelings of isolation. We have our own methods of doing it. And when we're purposefully leading a group of people, we need to be cognizant of this, and we need to have the tools and culture in place to help them through this. And I will cover several things like that as we go through this today. I want to talk a bit about a member of my Vistage group. She is this incredibly outgoing, fun, but driven CEO. She is great to be around. She's always the one that catches people's attention. She's funny. And in our Vistage group, she's also a great contributor. We love having her. And that's been kind of the way things were with her. Our first Zoom Vistage meeting was in March of last year. We had our lockdown in Dallas, Texas, and so we were doing this through Zoom. She shared with all of us that she could not think of a reason to get out of bed in the morning. This vivacious, outgoing, excited, fun person got to a point in only a few short weeks where she just couldn't function normally. Now, what we did in pure Vistage manner is we put together what we call a tiger team. That is a group of people, a small group intended to help somebody. We put together a tiger team and started working with her, started talking to her nearly daily, started helping her through some of these issues. Fast forward to today, 2020 was her company's best year ever. She got through it, but she didn't realize how challenging for a personality like hers working remotely really could be until it actually happened. And you might want to think about if you have a story like that, somebody in your organization that may be experiencing something similar, and in the breakout, maybe you share that with each other, and we talk about that a little bit more. So let's talk a bit about the tools. Now, every company has collaboration, has some form of tools, right? The most common one is email. But let's be honest, email as a collaboration tool, it sucks. Email is not a great tool for collaboration. It's intended for simple communication, and that's it. But there are dozens and dozens of great platforms that are dedicated to collaboration. And I chose a few icons, Microsoft Teams, Slack, Basecamp, just to put on the screen here. But there are so many great products. Foundationally, you need to have a tool that's intended to share communications in such a way so that you're not overwhelming people with communication, but you're also facilitating warmer interactions than a typical cold email trail that occurs. And the way this works in nearly every collaboration platform is using the concept of channels. The idea of a channel is I have this way of organizing a group of people. Now, I might organize those people in a department. I might organize them by a client. I might organize them as a project. These organizational elements are ways you put groups of people. If you have hundreds of people in the company, you may have 10 people on a project team. You put them together in a team or a channel. And on the screen you see in front of you, this just happens to be a screenshot. We internally use a product called Microsoft Teams. And on the left side, the items with the square icon, those are teams. And within each team, there is a channel, and the channel is an area to organize conversation. And when you're interacting at the channel level, what it does is it makes it really easy to have a conversation with an individual where everybody on the team benefits. For example, on the screen here, you see something in red. That's where a person, in this case myself, was called out by another member. When I get called out, I know that there's something intended for me. But all the other members of this team, all the other members in this channel, they can go see this, but they're not bothered with the alert that they've been called out. They just can know that there is something there. You can then engage as necessary. And if you think about this from a management or leadership perspective, you can easily check in on the dialogue that's going on any given effort group of people, whether that is departmental, project-oriented, client-oriented. Makes it real easy to crystallize the communication down into something that's functional. Now, there are some challenges with this, and some of the challenges are around rollout, adoption. How do you get people to use the collaboration tool? Collaboration tools really need to be championed by leadership, and that should be at the C level. When you're in a larger organization, you can pilot a collaboration platform at a departmental level, and show successes there. But the great thing about the projects like that, I would say the pilot projects, when articulating this to the C level, is that you can effectively show that there's an improved level of productivity, there's an improved level of morale, and there's a nearly quantifiable level of visible engagement. You can see when everybody communicates with each other. And we have little, let's call them policies, but they're really, not rules. They're more of a cultural choices on how we use platforms like this. For example, we require everybody to have their image up there. It's a simple thumbnail picture of themselves. It's just there so that we can build and tighten the boundaries so everybody can see what each other looks like. It's very simple. And the other thing we do is, in a product that's a collaboration platform, in this case Teams, we do not assign tasks through the Teams channels. And why is this? Well, it's really intended to be for collaboration and communication. If you say, I need you to go do this, what you're essentially doing is kind of abdicating out into the ethos something that you want somebody to do. Well, what if that person doesn't get it? What if they miss it? And if it's a channel like this, what if it scrolls up? It's kind of like when you CC somebody in an email and then 10, 20, 30 emails go back and forth and they're trying to figure out what they were supposed to do because you put it in a task for them. It's the same thing here. But that leads to the second technical component that is necessary to successfully support virtual organization. And that's shifting your company, shifting your organizational elements to be task and process based. When you work in an office, you can have a meeting, everybody kind of transcribes what they're going to do and they go off and do their thing. And then there's those little subtle check-ins. You see each other in the hall, you can walk into somebody's office. It's a lot easier. But when you're working with an entire team that's remote, some working asynchronously, that is at different times of the day, there needs to be some foundational element where each of you knows where they are. And what we found is that shifting the culture to task-based and supporting process-based allowed us to have the teams be much more effective. So for example, yesterday I sent a message to a webmaster on my team. And I just wanted him to do an update to one of the systems we have going on right now. Well, I did call him out in Teams and say, hey, by the way, I'm going to do this. Appreciate it if you do this. And I also commented that, and I created a task for you. And I went into our task management program and created a quick task. Likewise, he may have gone, if I didn't do that, and created a task himself. But the point is that there's this foundational system that supports all the tasks that individual contributors need and should do. And what's really good about that is as your company uses a system like this and it evolves, you can then see the components that make up what can potentially be a measurable, repeatable process.
Hey, John?
Yes. Yes.
Just for a moment, I just thought it might be curious to know what communication tools are being used at Zola. Like, are we using Microsoft Teams or Slack? I think we could just take a second to.
Yeah, that'd be great. Please, yeah, let's chime in. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Google Chat, Jira.
And Jira, the task tracker.
So those are the main ones. Is that correct? Google Chat and Jira. Okay. So this task part, at Basecamp, Anthony mentioned. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so I just thought that might be good context. Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. I appreciate that. That's great that you have the foundational elements already there. Mm-hmm. Which leads to this next slide. There are many task management systems. Many companies actually just use your traditional project management systems. Those can be a little heavy for the day-to-day tasks. If somebody needs to go off and do a update to a web page, using a full-on project management system might be excessive. But tools like Basecamp, Asana, Monday, tools like that, they make it really easy to go out and spawn quick tasks. In fact, we even have automation where somebody might literally send an email to a support desk, and if there's certain things in the subject desk, it automatically creates a task, in our case in Asana, In your case, you could create a task in Basecamp using the same type of process. So we make it really easy to be a task-based culture, but it's a very important aspect of the culture to use tasks to support everything, because otherwise there's just, what happens is as you grow and continue to add more people, there gets to be a lot of confusion about who's doing what. And if you have to have a single leader manage what everybody's doing at every given time, that is a significant amount of overhead. But if you shift that responsibility out to the team, each person responsible for the tasks, sometimes creating their own tasks, setting the due dates, marking them complete, commenting in them, then you build something that is sustainable and scalable.
So John, from your company, Content First, did you already have the task management system when you started and that was the beginning and you had this as a foundation culture, or did you evolve into that?
Oh, that's a really good question. So what we tried to do initially is build everything into workflow. And so what that did is it required us to think in advance about every step in a workflow. And while that is a good way to do things, especially if you're process oriented, what happens is there's specific tasks that need to get done that are independent of the workflow. So initially, what we found is being purely workflow based, process oriented, we were missing a lot of the day-to-day tasks and things would get dropped. And it'd be like, oh, I asked you to do this, but they didn't do it. And there is no system of record to go to and say, oh, by the way, this was requested 2 weeks ago. So what we did then is we continued workflow based. We used an automation tool for that. And then we added into it basic tasks so that people could get a task assignment. But the tool that we used at the time for task management was a bit cumbersome. So as we grew, we knew we needed to have something that was more project oriented. And like Basecamp's a good example, right? Kind of project oriented management of efforts. We moved to using Asana. So in our case, we're using Asana. So we set up a let's call it a project for every single client. And then we might create additional projects for sub-projects within a client. And then we assign the tasks through there. But no, we didn't start initially that way. We started as a workflow organization. And then we evolved, realizing that things need to be addressed.
I guess, and I would have the same question for Zola. Is that something that you've always had, these tools, Basecamp or Google Chat or Jira, or have you evolved to those?
I think I think the use of it definitely evolved, right? As we've gained more people and onboarded more people, the use of it's evolved. I think more than anything for a long time, it was just trying to figure out the exact software that worked for our company, right? So we did use we use Basecamp still. We did use Slack for a little bit, and then we moved everything to Google Suite. So it wasn't like it wasn't really capturing everything. It was just more about workflow and what works, since we work off of all the other Google Suites as well.
So it kind of decided to make that shift to Google Suites.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Anthony, because it just seems like that would be natural to have some evolution in the usage. And sorry, John, I thought that would be useful.
No, that is. I really appreciate that. Thank you for interjecting there. And yes, you're right. This is all an evolution. This conversation we're having is you're at a starting point right now. Different organizations are at different starting places, but it's going to continue to evolve and improve. And later in our conversation, we talk more about culture. You'll see that there may be some things that you can adopt culturally that will actually support the tools and technology you're using for managing that virtual workforce. We talked a bit about tasks, and one of the things that we realized when moving to a task-based culture, like a task-based model where everybody has a task, hey, can you give me a task for that? Oh, by the way, I created a task for you, that kind of thing, is it ended up being a nice management tool. So when we're going to talk a bit about engagement more, but one thing I'll mention is if you want to see if somebody's engaged, then just go out and look at their task list. And we call it the sea of red. If I go out, or any of the managers go out and they look at somebody's tasks and they see that the dates on them are in red and sometimes well in the past, either one of two things is happening. Either they're way overworked, or two, there's an engagement issue. And the engagement issue, it might be because they're checked out. It might be because they're not a fit for the virtual environment, or it might be because they just don't know how to ask for help. In any event, what we know and what we do as a team of leaders is if we encounter someone with a sea of red, we're going to schedule a conversation with them, a face-to-face, eye-to-eye conversation so we can understand what's going on with them. You know, maybe there's a personal issue. We're all remote. We're all working at sometimes separate times of the day. So we need to understand what's causing this, and then we can determine it. So the task management system, while it seems like something that's very logical and a component that's a great part of building good process internally, it also has a soft skill component where you can kind of measure the pulse of your team just by looking at how they're managing their own tasks.
Any thoughts on that from the Zola side? Have you seen this sea of red? I know sometimes I experience that in Salesforce.
I was just I don't always put deadlines on all of my tickets, so I think that that's an important thing to improve and then talk about with my team. So no, I haven't seen it yet, but I hope to never see it. But hopefully we can prepare by putting deadlines on it and then not seeing it. So.
Well, I tell you, I hate it when I see my sea of red, which does happen to me, you know, I would say once or twice a month. And it's not a good feeling.
Yeah, and I do want to, I'll talk about that deadline point you made. That's a really good point. So, and this also goes back to your question you asked before, Michael, about how we evolved. We used to just create tasks out, and literally they would just sit there in someone's queue, and that person would then either they themselves would assign the due date or their manager would assign the due date. But the strange thing that happened was you would have tasks that nobody assigned a due date. And they would sit and they would fall down, in this case, it's Asana, they'd fall to the bottom of the list because they are sorted by due date ascending. Okay, that's the default. Of course, you can change it, but that's the default. And so what happened is tasks would literally disappear off their radar. And they'll be like, well, what happened? And you go dig down, you find out, well, it didn't have a due date on it. So initially, we charged the team lead, right? Whoever was leading the team to assign due dates. But when it's a one-off task and not a process-oriented task, like I'm giving somebody a task to do, I just put the date on it. I'll usually put either the current date or tomorrow. My most common one is I just put due tomorrow, unless I actually have a real deadline, a real due date. And in the note, I'll just put set when you change the due date to when you plan to have it complete. This way, it sits in their queue at a point, and then they, if it's one of those tasks, they can decide when they can complete it. They change the date. But if I leave it completely blank, in the case of our company, those just kind of disappeared and fell through the cracks. So we had to adopt that model.
Thank you. That's great.
That happens to me by accident sometimes, and they do just disappear. Thankfully, they're not very important, but if I forget to put the due date, they will just literally disappear.
Yep. It happens to me too. It happens to all of us. And that's our model internally. It's not a rule. It's more cultural, but hey, make sure you put a due date on it, and the person who receives the task, they can always change it. They can always make it when they can get to it.
Does any of the software prompt for that, or you just have to remember to do it every single time?
I'm not aware of any that prompt for it, but I will tell you this.
That's a bummer.
We have significant number of systems integrations between our tools. So many of the tasks that get created in Asana are not created by an individual typing a task. They're created by another system pushing it. And in that case, while it's not a rule, the system will default to an appropriate date for that task in that process or workflow. And so if it's something that is, they can choose their own date, it might just make it due tomorrow. But if it's something that typically this is done a week after, so say for example, you were onboarding a new client. And so you have this process, this repeatable process that every single time you do all these steps for a new client, right? Every single time you do that. Well, those tasks can be assigned that task number 1 occurs, and then task number 2 is created with a date 1 week later. And if you're using automation or workflow automation, you can put it in there so that, yes, even though you're not defaulting it, the system defaults to a date at a certain point in time that's practical for that type of task.
Great.
Great. Okay, well, we're going to have our first breakout session. If you could grab the handout. What I'd like you to do is there are going to be 3 or 4 of you in a group. have a conversation about the tools you're using. I received through the chat quite a list, and we have the Google Suite, Jira, Basecamp, Miro, Figma. You were on Slack before, so there's several tools. I'd love for you guys to talk with each other, how each of you are using the tools, how effective they are, and how well they've been rolled out. I'd also like you guys to talk a little bit how much you're using email as a collaboration and task management tool, and if significant, what kind of impact that has on you, and then maybe also what's adoption like throughout the organization at the leadership level? Is there leadership adoption of these tools, or are these more departmental? And so we're going to take a breakout. We'll take about 10 minutes for that, and then I'll just jump in from group to group, and we'll go through that. And then at the end, I'd like you to nominate somebody to be your spokesperson. At the end, I'd like each group to speak to what came from it. Is everybody? I believe everybody's back now. So why don't we work through each group, starting with group one. I'd like to have your spokesperson tell us about what you got out of the conversation and what you're currently doing.
That's actually interesting. That was a really good discussion. We figure out that we are using another tool, and that common between developers. They use it more, and their business development, for example, and that's Discord.
Discord.
So yeah, Discord is mostly known as a gaming tool. People are gathering, and that's for communities things, and playing with friends, etc., etc. But it has really nice features like it's really easy to switch between different rooms where you talking with your voice and with different chats. And that's a great way how to simulate working environments, especially when you do like, hey, I need to go to talk to these people. We're using it during their software production planning cycles. And at the same time, Zach, you said you're using it more like a water cooler talk, right?
Yeah, so it's like a great way to have on in like the background while you're working, and it's a good way to kind of simulate the office environment of just camaraderie. We're used to having the ability to kind of not only go to each other's rooms or each other's areas to collaborate working wise, but we're able to be able to say, hey, how are you doing? How was it this day? Like, did you see this on TV and whatnot? Just to really kind of return to some normalcy outside of the office.
That's really interesting. Very cool. So I guess just curious, like how many are using Discord for one way or the other, for work, just curious, like.
I would say that all who are involved in software development at Exola uses that because that's mandatory for PI planning at least.
Okay.
And I guess the rest are using it from time to time. It's the main difference is you don't with Zoom or Google Hangout or Teams, you don't need to leave a chat or leave a voice chat and open the another, follow the links. You're just jumping from one to another in one app, running on your phone on your computer. So that's the that convenient part.
It's more convenient.
Yeah, in a way. It has its own issues.
Everything has its own issues, but it's really good for your software production planning, your software development teams, is what you're saying.
And Chris posted an interesting thing to the chat.
Oh, what was that?
I was just saying that Discord is good for networking events from trade shows.
Ah, great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people talking about trade shows and what can they do, and they feel that it's not as good as it used to be. So this is a great solution, and it's familiar to people from gaming, is what you guys are saying too. It's familiar. Great. Any other discussion on Discord? This has been excellent. Nope. Okay, John.
How about group 2? Why don't you tell us what you got out of it?
Hey guys, it's Berkeley. We had a good conversation, and some of it we talked about is like on tools because we're used to using tools. If you were a brand new company to tools, it might be a bit of a challenge that we have, but we're pretty robust in it. The quantity of tools we have is a lot. And I think we all were like, yeah, we have a lot, and it depends on the use case of which tool you use. Jira for task management, like we talk about from our team, like if it's not in Jira, then it's not a real project. Like it's just a topic of conversation. And we can talk about stuff all day long, but if it doesn't go into Jira and there's no brief, then it doesn't exist as a real project. And then we started talking about the future of Jira Align and the direction we're going to go. And then it got onto timesheets and what's the purpose of timesheets and why not? I come from environments where timesheets was a billable thing. From like an agency perspective, you charge a client based on billable hours in some cases. Here we don't have that. We use it for two reasons. One, to double check, make sure people are actually doing what they say they're doing. And then the other thing is too, is like from a resource planning perspective, which is the better reason to do timesheets and things for us today is make sure, hey, do we have the resources that we need? Because, a team is spending what should be 40 hours on it, but it's like 60. So what's the challenge there? What are we seeing that's going on that we need to address? Or can we help a team out from that perspective, or from an overall budgeting for time financially, for compensation budgets and things like that as well, to make sure that we have the right stuff. So,
and are those timesheets in a system that you can get that information, Berkeley? You can look at it?
Yeah, you can pull it and look at it from a team perspective and see what they're doing. And we have dashboards that take the timesheet information and put it into a dashboard and see what's happening. Look at it from the team to see what reality versus perception is, and take a look at it. And it's just with all of our tools, and it's like we talked about Miro as well as an example from a collaboration. Like there was some reluctance. I'll be the first one to raise my hand and say I was reluctant at first because I was like, ugh, another tool. But then once you use it, and then you can figure out how to use it from a collaboration perspective, particularly because we're working from home. And when you would normally have a whiteboard that you could all just go up to and write on and move stuff around, and like that becomes like a virtual whiteboard a lot of times, but it can build some pretty cool detailed stuff that you can't do in a presentation or in a Google Slides or Keynote or whatever. And allows you to collaborate.
Cool. Any builds on that? Anybody?
Well, we've been using Miro as one of our brainstorming tools, which has been really fun. And it's nice because it's worked for both offices because of the time zone difference. So people can add whenever. So it's also nice because it's not final ever, if that makes sense. So you can continuously work on it in like a collaborative style.
And this point that you made, Berkeley, like if it's not in Jira, it's not a real project. So that's kind of like a cultural, I don't know, John, I'm sure you'll get to that, but sort of a way to know, is this something? So great.
Yeah, and one thing about Miro, which we were discussing in our chat, that Miro is from our hometown. It's another big company from.
It's another perm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I heard that they may even sometimes steal your talent. So yes.
They do. There is a rivalry between us. Yeah.
Soccer team. I can see a soccer match or something in the future. Yes.
How about group 3?
So group 3 was Tanya and I.
Okay.
pull up my notes. So we're extremely dependent on email as a primary collaboration communication tool. We use like chat, Google Chat, just as much, but a lot of our communication is done via email internally and externally, at least for Tanya and myself. For task assignment, not so much. We'll use kind of the internal CRM that we have, and since that's kind of being phased out, we're going to start using Jira, and some people have been using Jira. Tanya does use Jira a lot for task assignment as well. Other than email, what do we use? You know, a lot of the things that other people have said. Google Chat, Jira for internal tasks, Basecamp for external. And then when the development teams might need to make a scheme or a wireframe or some sort of user flow for a partner, will, you know, they might use Figma or Mira to set that up and give that to us. And we've adopted pretty much all these tools. I've used Figma a couple times, not so much Mira. I think that my first time really using Mira was yesterday when we did an exercise with the project management department. For any tools that we use on our own, Tanya will just straight up call people when she needs something, if it's not getting done in time.
Always easier, yeah.
I've started to use Trello a little bit just for a little bit of organization on my own side, and for someone else's sake, because he needs to be more organized. And then do key leaders use the same tools? Most of them do. Honestly, other than Shurik, Shurik has a tendency of assigning tasks via email or maybe Google Chat. But I'm not entirely sure if he uses Jira. So for the most part, everyone's adopted all these tools in a similar fashion.
Thanks. Group 4, do you have anything different than the other groups? Why don't you tell us what came out of your conversation?
We said that the two offices use tools very differently, where the Perm office uses Jira way more than the US office, and the US office is way more face-to-face or tries to have live interactions. And we don't know if it's because we're in the US or if it's because it's HQ, but there's just a difference between the two. And then one of the other things mentioned that that ideas aren't really created in Jira. They happen more so in real life meetings and stuff like that. So that's maybe why the RLA office tries to be in person so much more, because they have to come up with those type of ideas. And then one of the things with how do we use the tools, not all of us have thumbnails and things like that. So there's still improvements that we can do with the basic skills, but that's kind of it. Alexi, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's it.
Great. Okay. Well, that's really helpful. It sounds like there are a variety of tools, but I like how you summarized it, the differences between the PARM and the U.S. office, and how you work differently. That's fairly common. But I really appreciate you all sharing here. Right now, we'd like to take a break, just for those of who might need one. I don't know how, it's getting pretty late in PARM right now. Do you want to do maybe 5 minutes? Will that work for everyone? Little one-off point-to-point type conversational systems that are in place, and they're not necessarily organized by project or by our department or team. It's more like, hey, we're on here and we're just chatting with each other, which, as you can imagine, it's a big pool of conversation. It's good for building bonds. It's built for like sharing where you've been and what you're doing personally. It's great for building bonds that way, but it is more challenging if structurally, if you kind of lump it all together into one point-to-point tool.
It's complex. That's what I'm taking away. There's a lot of complexity around this, and then different tools are good for certain things and not for others, depending on the application. And so I thought, though, what you were talking about earlier about kind of the rules or the guidelines or the principles, like, and that was also mentioned, I think Berkeley mentioned, if it's not in Jira, you know, it's not a real project. You know, sort of guidelines, you know, like, or having your image. I think Sophie mentioned, you know, having your thumbnail image, you know, visible, you know, these kind of guidelines that could be helpful to people. So anyway, well, I guess we're ready to get started. We're ready to reconvene. So we're gonna jump back in.
Sounds good. And yeah, to your point, yeah, what Berkeley said about Jira was, if it's not in Jira, it's not a project. That is a cultural attitude that you need to have when you're embracing systems like that. All right, so hopefully everybody's back on. We're going to move on to the second section. We're going to talk a little bit more about some processes as we evolve to building culture. And we have, you know, a few people that are in the HR space in here, and you know, I don't have to tell you, hiring the right people is how you build a great virtual culture. And when COVID hit last year, many organizations were forced to work virtually, but that was never a part of their hiring strategy. It wasn't a part of their plan. They weren't effectively using a process to hire people that could be successful working virtually. So they had to come up with ways to fix those issues when people were forced to work from their homes. But there are ways that you can embed into your hiring process a model and some steps that the people you're getting will also be successful if they're required to work remotely. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how it involves building the right team. One of the key tenets is that the people you hire, they have to be the kind of people that need a leader more so than a manager. So you want to build, when you're working remotely and everybody's a remote workforce, if there's an extensive amount of management required to manage the efforts of an individual contributor, that might not be the best type of contributor on your team. Those that work best remotely, they are the ones that they just need leadership and structure, and then they can be successful.
Can you pause for just a second on that,
Sure.
John? So I wondered if there could be people that could be very effective in an in-office environment, particularly this sort of person, or their nature of their job is, like, let's say someone who just has to spontaneously respond to whatever is arising, you know, in the office. And you're saying that sort of individual is going to be very challenging if they need a lot of management from the environment and cues and clues from the environment from a remote standpoint. Is that right?
Well, and I'm going to definitely talk about personality profiles and the types of people that are effective. But to your point, anyone that requires a significant amount of hand-holding is going to have challenges working this way, because the overhead associated with managing, because this is management, not leadership, managing a person like that is excessive. And ideally, you kind of figure those things out during the hiring process. And the first thing on hiring, I just want to kind of emphasize, and this is more like me getting on a soapbox here, is doing value-based hiring. That is, finding people that are in line with the company values. And, you know, not everybody, you know, has their values. What we do, I'll just show you what we have here. We have a page on the website that you can go directly to, but it's not in the sitemap and it's not in the menus, but it's our core values. And we make sure that everybody knows these core values, and we actually articulate these core values during the interview process, just so that people understand the expectation. Because when you deal with a remote workforce, especially one that's asynchronous, alignment with core values is really important. And these things, they need to come from leadership. And I've read some copy on your website, and it sounds like you guys have some core values in place already around the gaming experience. And so, you know, making sure that these are all known and there's available, and that people understand what the core values are, is just a really important part of alignment with your organization as you're doing the hiring. So we do have a process, and it's a standard process for hiring. HR has a standard process, but there are a couple of things that make it a little different, that allows us to filter based on behavior. And the way it works is, it's pretty straightforward, right? You list a job, you review a resume, you message the applicant, click a link, they They send their resume, you review it, you schedule a call, and then we do a behavior assessment, and then we do a face-to-face, and then we do a cognitive assessment. Okay, kind of a standard process for HR. But what we've introduced is some steps that ensure that the people that are joining our company are first-class digital citizens. Now, everyone nowadays is pretty comfortable working online, but there are people that are synchronous workers, and asynchronous workers. Those are some people that just have to have continual interaction, and there's that can work independently at different times. And in understanding what type of person you're getting for a different company, it differs by company, is really important. In our case, we introduced some manual steps into our process, and we did this purposefully. And the manual steps are really, really simple, but they tell us something about this person. For example, they get a message with a link to apply. So they click a link and go fill out a form. That's super simple, but believe it or not, we have a little fall off there. We have a good 5–10% fall off there because maybe the person just wasn't truly interested, or maybe they just don't keep up with their email. Many different reasons outside, of course, I'm not talking about if emails went to spam or something like that. And then there's another step where actually when we like a candidate, we just have an automated email that goes to them asking them to reply with an attached resume. Now, of course, you could easily have on the form, hit a button, upload your resume, right? And that's standard practice, just upload your resume. But what we're doing here is we're introducing, just so you know, at this stage, we typically already have a resume somewhere. But at this stage, what we're doing is we're just seeing what kind of responsiveness this person has. Are they good at following instructions? It's really simple. Can you reply to an email and attach your resume? And again, we get about another 10–20% fallout here. It's a simple step, but a person whose behaviors are not the type that they reply quickly to emails and they interact well with email, and if they don't have this foundational behavior, they're not going to be a fit for our company. So even before we've had that interview, we've already had filtered out some people. And then we do a review, and then we send another automated email with a link to schedule the first call. And that, again, has a fall off. And so with each of these steps that have manual requirements of that candidate, we don't find ourselves interviewing people that are not going to fit in with our 100% virtual culture. We have made mistakes in the past where we hired people that, I'll give you an example. One, she didn't reply with the resume, but I just continued to pursue her. And then she ended up when we hired her, she didn't reply to email. She didn't use the collaboration tool. She just doesn't fit. But every time we follow this process, we at least get the people that can comfortably behave and interact in a virtual world, in an asynchronous world. Now, one of the second part of it is how we optimize. So that's how we do the initial filtering. And then for our optimizing, and you may have had a presentation like this, I don't know, with a Vistage speaker, we do a behavioral assessment. And there are, countless behavioral assessments out there. Some that come.
Index, just as an interruption.
I'm
we
sorry?
use PI. We use
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so do we. Okay, great. So we use PI as a key part of this process. And so that part will decide if we're even going to have that face-to-face call. Because in PI, we already have the job description, the job profiles figured out, so we know if they're a fit or if they're just not even close. And in the PI, we also have kind of an idea of those that will thrive more in our virtual organization and those that may have some challenges. And since you do PI, then this will be really helpful when I talk about some of the profiles that we've still been able to work with, even though they might not innately seem like they could work virtually. So yeah, we do a face-to-face call, and then we do a cognitive assessment as well. And so in PI, these are actually some of the PI terms we use. We evaluate that independent person versus the collaborative, and typically, depending on the job, some of the people, we need them to be super independent. They can just be out there. We know they need to do their own thing. We know that type of person thrives by just making their own decisions and getting the work done. And then we also have the collaborative side with people that are more interactive, especially for those that have to work. Everything they do as an individual contributor is tied to a team. They need to be more collaborative. We measure the reserve versus sociable side of it. I mentioned earlier, my Vistage friend who just couldn't get out of bed 3 weeks into COVID. Her sociable on PI is literally off the chart. It's literally as far standard deviations all the way to the end as you could get on the sociable side. That doesn't mean she can't be successful in a virtual organization. It's just, she means you have to be purposeful. We'll talk more about that as well. Versus the reserved type, the person that really, they're not going to reach out to you. You have to reach out to them. And then there's the drivers. Those are the ones that, they want to get things, they want to put their fingerprint on things, versus the steady, which is, let's think of them as the operator person, the person that you give them a set of tasks and they're going to just work on their tasks on their own. And then we measure their demeanor on how much precision versus flexibility they have. So the trade-off there is a highly precise person is going to give you a high quality work product. But if you're looking at their tasks, you might find they have red tasks because they're kind of falling behind. The reason is because that highly precise person requires a significant amount of detail from the person assigning something to them for them to do their work. But that significant amount of detail is important because they're going to do a very, very good job. Conversely, we also have roles where we need flexibility. Like imagine you have a project underway and you're a month into it and there's a pivot. Everything's just going to change. Well, the flexible person's going to be like, yeah, great. Okay, great. Let's go the other way. Whereas the precise person is going to need to know in detail, why are we changing? What's happening? Things like that. So we need to measure all these things in the profile so that we understand what type of person we're getting and how it fits to the job function. But also we need to understand how they're going to fit into the team that they're joining. Because what we have found is a nice mix of profiles makes for a team that works very well together. And since we do PI, they all know each other's profiles and those are publicly shared. So they also kind of have an idea of how they'll interact. And then the last thing is, we like to know how much data this person needs to make a decision or task, because it'll give us an idea how fast they'll move. Some people need a lot of data to make decisions. Other people, it's like, yeah, I'm on it. I can take care of it. So we use this, in our case, it's PI, but of course there's many other products to assess their behavior and see if they're a good fit and will work in a virtual environment. So there are some challenges that we've dealt with, and I guess you've probably dealt with as well. So that that highly independent, highly social driver, put into a you need to work from home exclusively model, there's a risk of depression. And if you lead somebody like this is actually, you can solve this like we solved for our friend. And the way you solve that is that you are someone they can talk to. So imagine I am leading a person like this. I'm going to have a regular scheduled call with them, or I might just have it on the fly. Hey, you want to jump on a call? Because these are social people, they want to talk. And then I will just let them talk. Oftentimes they monologue. And what happens is they get a sense of energy from that interaction. And they get what they need that they normally would have received in an office environment just by bumping into people walking through the hallway or in the kitchen or in meetings. You can help them get that sense of personal interaction just by being there and letting them talk. And so we do have a couple people like that. They're managers, they're people, and they do an amazing job. And I just make sure that those people have time to share and talk and get that personal interaction that they need. Now, we also have collaborative, steady, reserved people. And the thing about them is they're going to get the job done and they're going to follow process. And if you have somebody who's a collaborative person, who's steady, who's very reserved, you just have to make it clear what that process is and what you expect and let them do their work. And they're going to be great contributors. The precise person and steady person, I mentioned precision before, they're going to seem initially like they're less productive, but that's just because they need a lot of detail to successfully do a task. But once they have that and they've become a part of your organization and they know how things are done and they have what they need, they're going to be producing the best quality work product. And anybody who has a job function that requires a significant amount of detail, you want them to be high on that precision side. You want them to be steady so that they consistently produce results. You just have to understand it might take them a little bit longer to get going. And then the highly reserved steady, independent, flexible person, like I have one like this, like you literally may never hear from that person, and they are fine with that. They're out doing their job. They have the account authority to do their job. They have the independence. They aren't required to report because we let them be themselves, but they're going to be successful. And if you're building a task-based organization or a results-based model, as long as they are producing results and getting the things done they need to get done, you just let them be themselves. So when you look at these models, and like you say, you use PI, if you make that available to any leader in the organization so that they understand what their team looks like and they understand how to read the results of that, they can put together a great team, but they can also understand why some people are performing at different levels or working in different ways than others.
Any thoughts on that? Thoughts on that? No? Do these sorts of workers seem familiar in terms of the types of people that you might encounter?
Well, every single time that you've said something, John, there's been a moment where I'm like, oh, this is like this person. Obviously, I can't say who they are, but
yeah.
It's been nice to think about, even from the beginning, when we were hiring people to be in the office, it was much more collaborative and things like that. And I think, John, the biggest takeaway that I even had just before that was the hand-holding versus managed versus led. And I don't think I've necessarily taken that into consideration, because when you're in the office, it's usually hands-on and you can kind of go through the process or shadow, and you have more of the opportunity to connect with the different types of learning rather than just written and things like that. So you have demonstrations and visualizations, and a lot of that is there. But I think that the last bit has been very important, and I'm trying to take as many notes because it is hiring for a different type of person. And then also, as we grow, we're trying to hire for all of these different types of people as well. So thank you. I like, a lot of people are showing up in my head right now, so it's pretty cool. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
I think for me, if I could just add something, some of these challenges that you've outlined are actually, in terms of when we're expanding our team, when we're interviewing, these are the things that we're trying to actually knock off. And I think that having, being in this kind of virtual working environment, a lot of other good, and I guess a lot of weaknesses that we've been discussing throughout this whole, presentation have maybe a little bit more visible. So when we're expanding our team and trying to align our company goals, our department goals with actually hiring, I've found that it's been more successful when I look at it like, okay, I need to find somebody who's highly reserved, steady, independent, and flexible, somebody that I can trust. And I think that I weigh that heavier now than I did when we were actually in office, because I felt like, it was obviously very much easier to interact when we're physically next to each other. So I've even seen a different approach when it comes to interviewing people based on the challenges that we've had. And I think that overall, it actually helps, not only finding the right candidate, but also kind of moving our own department forward with, resolving these challenges and getting new ones, right? We never want to stop trying to get better. So I think it's these challenges are great. I'm glad that you brought it up, so I don't feel alone in them. But yeah, I know we've used them to our advantage, right? All of the troubles and challenges that we have, we definitely use them, and when we expand and interview people. So yeah, thanks, Jim.
Awesome.
Great. Anybody else have any comments? There's a book by Brian Miles. He runs a company called Belay, and he talks about the type of personality that they've found has the biggest challenge working completely remote, and he called it terminally unique. And the reason is it's kind of like a free spirit, that a highly sociable free spirit that, if you had an event, say, where everybody needed to be in the lobby at, I don't know, noon, this person would show up at 12:05, doing cartwheels, and they're the center of the attention, and they're this type of personality that doesn't really always engage well. And that type of personality can work in very creative type organizations. Think of an agency, for example, that has a creative channel and they have an office and everyone's together and you can kind of corral this person. But this personality type is very challenging when they're on their own because they tend not to engage. So when you're interviewing people, this term terminally unique is interesting because, you know, if somebody comes across as this center of attention personality that has to be like that, they will have challenges virtually. So the next thing I want to move on to is a bit about leadership and talk to some of the things that organizations, as they grow, you work to build really good leaders. You build leaders that can lead teams and that can lead the enterprise internationally, like your organization has been doing. But there are some things that you have to make sure are on that checklist of leadership in any organization that is striving to have a remote workforce. You know, obviously, and this, of course, you already deal with this regularly, is cultural awareness. When you transcend cultural boundaries, there are things that you have to be cognizant of. The leader on a virtual team needs to be able to build alliances over time and geographical distances, which is a little different than when you would go, you know, meet somebody face to face or see somebody at an event. You'd have a conversation in such a way to build those bonds. How do you build an alliance when you work asynchronously? That is a leadership trait. And more so than even when you're in an office, having a metric-focused orientation towards meeting goals is critical. I mean, you're measuring the results and you move and you become task and process based. There have to be some sort of metrics that you can measure success. And as a leader, you need to not only be metric focused, but you have to be one that spends the time monitoring progress. So you can see how the organization is doing, whether you're responsible for a department, a project, or the enterprise. How are we doing? What does our scorecard look like? And are we meeting it? And another skill that leaders have to truly embrace are the best meeting facilitation skills. Because when it's an entire remote team, getting together is more of a luxury, right? It's not like, hey, let's just all run down at 10 o'clock and go get in a conference room. I've got to put together half a dozen to a dozen people around the world. And so getting together, it's really important that that leader has really good facilitation skills and follows some form of methodology. I gave an example on the slide. EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System, has this thing called a level 10 meeting, but there are many others out there. The key takeaway, though, is anyone who's leading a meeting, they have to have an agenda in advance. They have to manage to a time boundaries. They have to start on time and end on time. And they have to really be organized and focused. And any leader in an organization that intends to have virtual teams needs to be really strong in this capacity. Otherwise, it just creates challenges for building the morale of that remote worker who feels maybe their time wasn't best used. The other thing is as a leader, you do have more of a challenge around work-life balance. You have to set some expectations about your time when the clock might be 24/7, and what does that look like, which goes along with managing a global clock and having a strategy for how you, as a leader, manage that clock. And I took a quote here because I thought it was appropriate that you know, at the end of the day, leadership is still leadership: authentic, connecting with others, promoting inclusiveness, networking, interpersonal, building relationships and trust. Those are always important things. But what differs here is actions associated with skills must be deliberate and intentional, and a leader must have a defined strategy for using the skills and a way to measure the results. It's really important as you're grooming and growing leaders in your organization. There's a term that is used, and there was several books written on this, called servant leadership. When you move to a virtual organization where you have distributed teams and people are working remotely, the role of boss really needs to kind of go away, because that model of boss is back to that concept of management versus leading, right? A leader who is successful with a distributed team doesn't come across like a boss. They come across as a team member. Now they still have accountability for the results of that team, but the way they interact with them is they are a member of the team, not so much as the boss. And they are really good about setting expectations and communication, and those expectations go back to them. You know, for example, if I'm on a team, hey, I'm here for you. I would like to hear like status from you every Monday. And by the way, I will give you an update every Thursday on where we're going, things like that. So when you think about the role of a leader in a team that's virtual, think servant leadership, think collaborative, think not a boss, not a manager, but more of a partner in helping that individual contributor be successful. So we have a second breakout session right now. And in this breakout session, we have the handouts a little bit more about evaluation of candidates. So I'm asking a couple of questions. One is how do you evaluate candidates to ensure they will thrive in a virtual setting? What have you done to ensure your team effectively communicates with each other? And then what leadership skills do you feel need work in yourself, for example? And what are you doing well, and how are you doing it? And I listed with bullets each of those key leadership skills that I had on the slide earlier. So I'd like to have everyone break out, and Michael, you have the host control. So if you
Yeah,
want to...
I put in the chat just so people, if they need to get the questions, grab them quickly, because remember, our chat does not go with us into the breakout room. It stays behind in some other place. So we will create some new rooms. You will be in a different room than you were in the last time. Let's see. No, excuse me.
And let me ask everybody before we break out, was 10 minutes too long, enough time? Should we do more time, less time? 10 minutes still good? What would you prefer? You can put in the chat if you have an opinion.
It was fine.
Okay, great. Well, we'll just stick with 10 minutes then.
Yep, so that'll be, if it's 9:14, that'll be like 9:24. So
great.
These unusual times.
They hire people, it's more about, you know, selling the company and understanding the motivation and how we can help that motivation become successful for the company. From the US perspective, I know what I like to do is when I'm interviewing people, I like to see how much information they give me in that short amount of time, how they can have a conversation with me, answer my questions, and be as effective in the short space of time that we have. Because like I mentioned earlier, we don't have that office to office feeling where you can give an answer and come back in a few hours. Like my time is valuable nowadays, considering that I have multiple reports and, you know, have to check in with them every day. So it's really crucial that when we are looking for candidates that they can, you know, converse and have a conversation and answer questions in a very short space of time. So that's super important for us. I think one thing that we do, going to the third question, I think that one thing that we do to ensure that we effectively communicate with one another is create a culture where we allow for that to happen. So whether that be, you know, playing games with one another or having conversations about movies, or just kind of creating that lunchroom water cooler kind of talk where we all kind of get to know one another, and then that sense of reliability and that comfort and that that reliance is there and pretty effective. On top of that, creating transparency too. Being a global team, you know, we all kind of work on different things, and it's more often than not we can get some wires crossed. So it's understanding what our colleagues are doing. It's understanding how they're trying to get, you know, to their endpoint, and potentially how another one of us could help aid that process. So, you know, definitely creating the transparent communication forum is super important to making sure that our effectiveness is there. And then things that we need to improve on, you know, the two main things that came out of our group was managing our global clock. You know, we have, we have obviously the Russia office, we have the Perm office, I mean the South Korea office, but also we have people in Berlin, we have people in the Philippines. So it's really understanding, how do we balance that? And then it comes to, creating a better work-life balance, considering that we are accessible 24/7, even before COVID, even more so now. How do we create that work-life balance? I know I struggle with basically rolling out of bed and going across the hall and getting to work, right? And how do we all create kind of this balance where we aren't just feeling like we're going to work and that's that? Coming to work and making sure that we're motivated and that we're getting things done is super important. I think that managing global clock and really being conscientious of a work-life balance can help us get better at that.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. Hopefully this has all been beneficial for all of you. Now, I had in the calendar or the schedule right now to take another break. I realize that it's getting kind of late. Do you guys want to take a 5-minute break, or do you want to move forward?
I'm good going. I don't know about everybody else.
Hey, John, before we move on the global clock, would somebody need a break? I heard a break. No? Is there any best practices you've seen on managing the global clock before we move off of that topic? Yeah, I'm actually going to talk a bit about the culture of the workday and flexibility in the next section, and I will actually address that, yes. Okay. Great, so did we decide no break, or does somebody want a break? It's okay if you want a break. Nobody is saying yes, though, that I can see. Okay. Okay. All right, then we'll just move forward. So the third part of this conversation that we're having is about building culture, intentionally building culture. And what is culture? Culture in an organization is how people behave and interact independent of the rules that they're bound to. And in our organization, we were very intentional about the culture we were building. And one of the first tenets of that culture is what I call over-communicating. What do I mean by that? So simply put, if you're in an office environment and you send an email to somebody, oh, hey, by the way, I took care of this and the client was really happy, great. You don't typically respond or expect a response back, because oftentimes you might bump into that person, they might, or you might see them, they smile, they nod, or they put their head in your office and say thanks. There's these little things that we do when we interact face-to-face that they close the loop of communication. But when you are separated from each other and often asynchronously working, that communication loop, it needs to be explicitly closed. And when you're using a collaboration tool, the way you handle that is, yes, you can do an acknowledgement text, but that's a bit of work. It's easily handled simply with emojis. If somebody messaged me in Teams and said, hey, by the way, we just did this for a client, they're really happy, they love what they got, I might give a thumbs up, right? And that closed the communication loop. And in our organization, it's so ingrained to over-communicate to close those loops that if somebody doesn't do that, I actually wonder if they got the message, which is kind of the point of doing this, right? You don't want people to be concerned of whether the message was transmitted. So I call it over-communication. Now, one of the things when you're communicating, let's just call it how you communicate with each other. If you are crossing cultural boundaries and you're doing this through text interaction, through some collaboration platform or chat tool, you got to realize that certain things don't work. Sarcasm, it doesn't work unless you have great emojis to support it. So those are the types of things that you want to make sure that you're thoughtful of when you're communicating through text channel. Is if you're using something that is humorous, sarcastic, or in a way that is not serious, you have to offset that, because communicating is a little different there. And the other thing is, I call it time zone surfing. So this is most commonly handled when with email, right? So in your organization, you're around the world. So say an email starts in Param, and then people are interacting and it gets copies and it replies and it builds. And then it goes over to LA, and then it works its way around to Korea. Like, this thing starts building energy on its own, and it creates this tsunami of communication. So when I say over communicate, I also mean that you are thoughtful in how you communicate and thoughtful in the geographies you're using, because you don't want to create this tsunami of communication that kind of builds on itself and creates issues or conflicts. The other thing is with the
communicating things, and this is something that we do regularly, find a way through what collaboration tools you use to celebrate wins, okay? Whether that is a new client, whether that's a new product launch, celebrate your wins, because this is how everybody can come together under the same set of goals and be excited about what's going on in the organization. The second piece on that is what I call a culture of gratitude. Again, when you see face to face, people are like, yeah, thanks, appreciate it, or they'll give you a nod, a wink. But when you're separated, if you want to build a really strong culture of people working well together, acknowledge that publicly. Hey, by the way, John, I just did this project for the client. I hope it works out. I'll respond back. This looks great. The client loves it. It's amazing, great work. And I'm going to do that very publicly in the channel that we're having this conversation. But what's really great about, as a leader, you working on building a culture of gratitude, is watching it blossom. And then you start seeing team members, hey, by the way, I just finished this. Oh, thanks a lot, man. That was great. I just absolutely love it. Looks cool. People start sharing our gratitude with each other. And that just builds, and it creates this and strengthens the team in such a way that it relieves some of the tensions and conflicts associated with the competitive environment that some businesses have, building that foundation on gratitude. And so the third thing that I like to build on top of there is trust. So how do I build trust when everybody is distributed? Well, let's start with the leader. First of all, trust happens when people do what they say they're going to do. You as a leader, when you have a team of people and you say, hey, by the way, we're going to have this new training coming online. It's going to be, in 3 months, we're going to have a training program for everybody. You're going to love it. So that's great. And as you as a leader, as long as you in 3 months fulfill that, great, you'll get that trust. But trust is something that is incremental. Trust builds on things. So if you have a long-term commitment you've made to a team, every couple of weeks you check in with them. Hey, by the way, just let you know, we got funding, so now we can do the software selection. Oh, now we've implemented the software. Great. Hey, training's gonna be scheduled in the next 2 weeks. You're keeping the key of flow of information that leads to the commitment you've made to your team members. Likewise, this is also part of the task-based organization. Trust happens when people fulfill their commitments and get the things done they say they're going to do. And when everything is dialogue-based and, hey, I'll go do this, and some people forget and balls get dropped, then the trust with the team, within the team, kind of falls apart. So when you're task-based and things are getting done, a person has a queue. They get their work done. The person that work supports, because things tend to have a pipeline of work, that person trusts that this other person is going to get the job done. And so building those trust elements within the team over simple little things, like completing a task, and building trust from you to them over being communicative and meeting your commitments. And in the case of a commitment you made that for whatever number of reasons can't be met, acknowledging, oh, by the way, we're not going to be doing this, we're going to shift it to another date, I just want to let you know, keeping them in the loop. That builds that foundation of trust. So gratitude on top of over communication and building a model of trust. This is culturally what's necessary to have a team that really works well together, independent of the rules and policies that get put in place. Now, when people were forced remote, they kind of stuck to some of their patterns, but some things changed. And I always say the workday is the workday. There's this myth that you fall out of bed and you're in your pajamas and you go to work. Yeah, some people can do that, but that is not sustainable over time. What I ensure is that the people that have a hard set of things that they do or work certain blocks of time, I make it very clear, look, you need to start with your morning ritual, whether that's having breakfast or doing a workout. Start with your morning ritual and get ready for the day as if you were going somewhere. Get dressed for the day and then start your work day. And build expectations with your team of people that depend on you when your workday is going to be. And if you work a single block, you also and your team members need to know that there's a point where they can turn off the computer. They can end their workday. So you build parameters around the workday. There's this old joke, right? And the old joke is pertinent today more than ever. I'm not sure if I'm working from home or living at the office. And for a lot of people who didn't build structure around the workday, and a lot of enterprises who haven't built structures around the workday, that's what it feels like for them. And that is simply not a sustainable way to keep a team motivated and working productively. The idea here I put out here is to kind of change a little mindset, right? Is people always say, I'm going to work. And what you want to do is start building towards the, I have work that needs to be accomplished. They start their workday with the mindset that there are things they need to get done that day, not so much as a physical place that they have to go. Now, with working remotely, with virtual teams, inherently comes flexibility. And it's almost a paradox that the workday, the flexibility. The flexibility, though, is there. People are going to go and drop off their children at school or pick up children at the end of the day. People are going to run errands. It's going to happen. And what I do is I encourage our team that if there is some form of flexibility where they have to leave at 4, then they need to set the expectation that, okay, but I'll be back online between 7 and 8, and I'm going to follow up with your emails then. You should allow for flexibility for the job functions that are bound to specific deliverables. You don't manage when they work. You manage what they're getting done and allow for that flexibility. Now there are some exceptions, right? You know, call centers, things like that, where you're bound to certain time frames. But overall, you should accept the fact that flexibility is an inherent part of working remotely, and just build that as a part of your culture, that as long as expectations are met, and most importantly, that tasks are completed, deliverables are done, and the expectations around the job function, that is what they're expected to do, is clearly articulated and measured, then that flexibility is something you don't even really have to manage. It's just a benefit of working in a virtual organization. Now, one of the things that we do in our company is after somebody's been with us for about 3 months, we send them a care package. It has a backpack and a notebook and a book and several other things that they get. Just kind of like, hey, it's a welcome aboard, but a little bit delayed. And what we do is we encourage them to, when they're traveling somewhere, which of course lately has been more difficult, but since everybody's distributed when they're in their local city, we encourage them to get their picture taken. Get their picture taken somewhere with the backpack. And if they don't have it, get a picture taken with a sign. And what we have in our collaboration system in Teams is we have a team that just says, show us where you go. And that's where people go to share pictures. It's like using social media to do it. And we are all in social media together, but this is internal. This is something that each time somebody gets the backpack, they can share with everyone else, hey, this is where I took it. Now, I worked for a company called All Covered. I sold my third company, Wave 2, to a company called All Covered, which was owned by a Japanese company called Konica Minolta. And that company, they gave everybody several things. And what they encouraged people to do is to take the mouse pad wherever they go and get their picture taken. And as you can see here, I'm in Hong Kong. I was with the mouse pad. I replaced it with Xola's logo there. But what I found really interesting is I didn't realize it, but Xola does this too. Had no idea. I went on searching online, looking for pictures that I could find, and look what I found in here. I found at G-Star in 2017, there's Dimitri, and there's the Xola logo. And then there's another picture of, there's Constantine with the Xola logo on his shirt, celebrating Russia's win over Egypt.
It's great, John. Great.
Oh man.
And there's one more picture I found of Olga online. She was in London, and she desecrated the Banksy.
Oh boy.
Sharing personal events, sharing things you do, and putting your company a logo on it, or handing out something that they can get their picture taken with. It's just a great way to tighten some of the bounds and find a place to share that. Now, as we talked to when we're talking about personalities, this is not for everyone, and you are going to have some mishires, and that's just a part of business. But what I'm hoping is that you'll get from this. There are certain things that you can test up front. Now, when somebody does leave, though, this is an opportunity to learn. And we have people from HR in here, so I know you have exit interviews and you learn You learn from what happened. You learn from the experience. And, this may already be a part of your script, but more so even with virtual, it's sure, why are you leaving? And then it's, okay, why are you really leaving? Giving them that opportunity to actually share, making sure that that conversation happens with somebody other than the manager they work directly for. You really need to understand when you have one that's not quite a fit or a departure for this type of work, what it is that you can learn from it and improve your own processes and organization as you go. So what now? What do you do next? Well, look at the tools you're using. We had Breakout. We talked about collaboration tools. I hear a wide variety, but I also hear there are some movements towards consolidating and being more consistent on the tools you use. The collaboration tool is the most important up front. So there's a single way, at least, if not organizationally, departmentally, or by location, that you can all interact with each other. Moving towards task-based, it sounds like some of the organization is heavily task-based, others maybe not as much. You can always start with your own team. Augmenting your hiring process, it sounds like you use PI, which is a great start. Refining that so that you can filter out those that maybe aren't going to be optimal working virtual. And the last thing, and in my opinion, the most important, is cultural. Do you have a culture of over-communication, gratitude, built on a foundation of trust? And are these things soon? So I would encourage each of you to assess these things and offer these things and use some of these things that we discussed today to improve as leaders. So what I'd love to get from each of you today, and I have a few questions, is if you don't mind, and going around the room and just tell me a takeaway that you received and how you would apply it. And Michael, do you want me to just let everybody do that now, or did you want to call on people individually?
Well, I think it'd be great for people to voice it. There's actually like a lot of research that's saying something aloud, others can hear it, and then their minds can absorb it. So I think it's great to actually have people talk about what they think their takeaway is, and others can build on it or have something very different. So that would be my preference. So who would like to share a takeaway? Do you need just a second, or is anybody ready?
I'm ready.
All right, Dimitri, jump in there. Awesome.
So there was a lot of takeaway. Thank you very much, John. That's and it's great that you have hands-on experience. So it's and you build that before all of this happened. So you naturally fit your company for working in virtual environment. So I'll just take one takeaway, which I think is really important for me, and I'll definitely be using that. I really like the approach you used for filtering the candidates. When you send in an email immediately, people you like, and asking to, upload or send this resume, even if you have that. It's a good way to hire people who are capable of working in this environment, and I'll definitely use that. Thank you.
Awesome. Great.
I guess I'll go next. Yeah, a good takeaway that I got from this, and again, there's many takeaways, but is using collaboration tools, the right way and the most effective way to grow your leadership, especially now that we're not doing face-to-face as much. It definitely can be a little bit more difficult to really be able to lead a person, especially when they're at home. You don't know what they're doing at all. I know a lot of people at this company probably have that same sentiment.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think in creating this virtual environment now, I think would only help us when we get back to the physical environment, right? And so a lot of the takeaways that I'm having from this session is one, obviously now, how do we improve our virtual culture, but also in doing that, how do we prepare to take what we learned, what we implemented in the virtual world, I guess, or working remotely, and how do we build and expand on that when we are back in office, and more importantly, how do we use it to our advantage to not only grow the success of everybody in my department and anybody else's department, but actually the company is in a holistic view. So I look forward to taking all the things that I learned here, creating a more, a better virtual environment for my team, and then obviously translating that into the real world when that time comes.
Great.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I think the time that we have and how long we've been working exclusively from home puts some of these practices, like solidifies them. Like if this were a month, we would probably do this thing virtual and then like you would dust it under the rug and move on, and go back to normal. But because it's been an extended required virtual situation, that we've all adjusted, we've learned, and then how you communicate. I think it's been effective because we have sole Korea office, we have the perm office, and it's going to help us to better communicate succinctly. And the one thing I've taken away is like be more succinct, be clear, make sure the direction or the ask when you need help from another office is just super clear and succinct when it's in written form.
Andrew, what do you got?
I think the biggest outcome of this meeting for me was that it's better not to use any, you have to be clear on what you say and not to use any irony or jokes or any type of this thing, because usually, especially in Russian culture, people joke a lot and they fool around, and it's like a common practice. Irony is like one of the most common things you would meet in at least perm office. And looking at the conversations lots of people are having right now in digital environments, when you're like a side person who see it like from the side, you always see when these type of things happen and they really feel awkward, and they completely agree it's a great recommendation. And I think it's like something really useful and to consider.
I think we talked about that in a previous meeting, that sarcasm, and I personally love sarcasm, but it's not necessarily my friend in many of these communications. So thank you for mentioning that, Andrew, that, or even joking, which is kind of more fun, maybe more positive than sarcasm, but even that sometimes. So it's
double-edged, I guess.
It's tricky. I mean, maybe the emojis, I don't know. Is that what you were suggesting, John, with the emojis as a way
that is right.
to at least express some.
If you can't articulate it verbally, at least use the emoji somehow to soften it, especially with sarcasm and especially jokes, because we like to joke too as well, but we use those emojis to support it.
Yeah, I mean, because humor is great, but if it's confusing or, yeah, great. Artem?
So for me, there were a lot of takeaways as well other guys. So like Dima, for me, it was pretty interesting to hear about the approach to do interviews with candidates. And I'd like, for me, it's like a checklist with, we have 4 points when, for example, what have you done to ensure your team efficient, effectively communicates, and et cetera, cultural awareness, and all these points that we've mentioned today. It's like a checklist that I could use in my day-to-day work, and it's pretty useful for me. So I want to say thanks for this day. It was really good. It was really nice. So thank you all for this day.
Awesome. Alexei?
Yeah, so I like the idea about the gratitude, and we all live in a feedback deficit right now, and many of us on mute, and sometimes the camera is off, and in the chats, you kind of think the thank you word, but you don't type it in. But and the idea is to give them more feedback, maybe just with a smile, with a emoji. But more feedback is helpful, and the people on the other side, they and myself, when I communicate with someone in the chat or through the email, it's hard to guess the mood. It's hard to understand the feeling or the message was sent with, and maybe spend a little bit more time, maybe 30 seconds more, a minute more, just to put the feeling you have and the intention you have with the message, not just the the task, the pure task. Yeah.
Fantastic. Gratitude is so powerful, so powerful. Awesome. Maria.
I feel like I recognize the way of our company living in a lot of slides that John has shown us today. What I like the most is the highlights of real importance of over communication, gratitude, and trust in teams. We also thought about it a lot and talk about it a lot. As Alexei mentioned, feedback is one of the areas that we are constantly working during last year. So it was like, to highlight the importance in once more. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, Sophie.
I still love the deadlines. That was very important, and I think it's really helpful during the remote work period, as we'll never go back to normal, but we'll always be a hybrid. So that's kind of fun to kind of keep the teams together. And then you mentioned something about facilitation and like how the meetings are going and stuff like that. And I feel like that's definitely a skill that I need to improve upon. So that's a big takeaway for me, just improving the overall agenda, what gets done, everybody is aware of tasks, and making sure that we're all moving forward towards common goals and stuff like that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Great. Tatiana.
For me, like the most important thing I learned today is that like how bad it is to, like to have this over communication, as you mentioned. And yeah, like that, regardless whether we are working like from home or whether we are working from the office, so that the work-life balance should still be preserved. Let's put it so.
Sure. And Chris, I know that you had to step away for a minute. What we are doing is just any one thing that stood out to you from, sometime today, and what would that be that, stood out from your standpoint?
I think the different nuances of tools that people actually use. I know a lot of us end up using similar tools, but everyone has like their own little preferences and different one-offs that they use that they also find beneficial. So it was just interesting to hear about that.
Mm-hmm. Was there any that you thought, gee, I'd like to experiment with that, or more just to understand how best to work with the other people?
Probably just best to work with the other people.
Yeah.
Probably becoming more familiar with the Miro board, just because I've really not really experienced that and used it all that much. But since it's so frequently used kind of by the firm team, and it's becoming more used by the PM team, it's going to be beneficial to get some more expertise in that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Great. Well, I think that was the whole group in terms of the one key takeaway. So it was a very valuable presentation. I think it's exciting. You've built a fully virtual firm, John, but as mentioned, many of these practices can be applied to a firm that is both hybrid, virtual and, in the office, and seem like they would be really good practices regardless of whether you're fully virtual or just quote unquote partially virtual. So do you have something to share on where to find me that I see here? Yes.
Yeah, just if anybody has any follow-up questions or just further clarifications on what we discussed today, I'm a Vistage member, and my name is John Arnott, so you can find me on my Vistage. If you're not using my Vistage, it's an amazing tool. There's some great things that you can follow and learn from. I'm in LinkedIn. My personal website is johnarnott.com, or you can just email me at the address on here. Also, I want to point out that Vistage measures everything. So that if you get a survey, I'd appreciate if you fill it out. And if you liked this presentation, I'd appreciate a positive survey.
Yes, Vistage does. Thank you, John. There is a survey after each meeting. And if you fill it out, it helps, because then I, as a Vistage chair, am looking at what are these surveys, how have this speaker been received? What are the feedback, any specific, actual comments, in the survey. It's not a long survey, it's very short, but it is very helpful. And then John, maybe just share how you didn't used to use the My Vistage and why you've transferred over to using it.
Sure. One last thing I'll share on that is when I first started Vistage, I didn't join any of those groups on Vistage and My Vistage. About 1.5 years ago, I decided to try that out, and I picked some that were tied to my industry, some that were tied to entrepreneurship, leadership. And what I found is people in Vistage just ask really good questions. So oftentimes I'll see, it comes through my email as an alert with that this is happening. They'll ask a question that, wow, yeah, I could benefit from that. So I'll go in and see the 5, 10, 20 different answers that can help me. And other times they're asking a question that I can answer and I can participate in as well. So I found that My Vistage is actually a really good tool because it's a great community of people that are there truly to help each other. So if you're not using it, take a look at it.
Yeah, and I know it might seem like, oh, it's more work. It's really a resource. If you go in and ask a question, I usually get like 3 answers in the less than 3 hours from other leaders. So it's just, it can, or you can read it at your leisure. It does not have to be, it's just a resource, and it's very helpful. So thank you, John. And I just want to thank John again for this really helpful building a virtual culture, and all the customization. I mean, very impressive with the backgrounds and the Zola offices. So we appreciate that, and the creativity that you put into it. And with that, I think we can close on time. So yes, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.